Hello everybody, welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello, Scott.
Josh, my friend, EA are up to their old tricks yet again. I was going to say sinking to a new low, but they sort of just marinate in that general area. Not that much surprises me, especially in the video game industry when, trying to think of ways for, every time a top tier company thinks of a new way to leech us post-launch, it's just kind of like, oh, okay, you found another one. That's cool, I guess. So EA, the latest thing is that they've added, or tried to add, adverts to UFC 4 after all the reviews were published. So they weren't part of anything to do with the review process. Our review went live, all that stuff, and then they started putting adverts for it was for The Boys, the Boys season 2. They inserted them into the replays on the fights themselves, so every time you would watch a replay, when it was cutting to a title card in between pieces of footage, big old pop-up saying The Boys season 2 is coming. It's also part of the octagon, it's on the mat and stuff like that as well, which is a bit more commonplace, but they've never done adverts in between the fight replay before to such an egregious pop-up style degree. There was a massive backlash immediately, obviously, as there should be, and EA immediately went, oh god, sorry, we did that, didn't we? And we took them away. And so they've issued a statement saying that this type of advertising inventory is not new to the UFC franchise, though we have typically reserved displaying ads to specific main menu titles or octagon logo placement. So it is new. It is a new thing. That's the first thing. They haven't done it. It's abundantly clear from your feedback that integrating adverts into the replay and overlay experience is not welcome. Also very true. We realised that this should have been communicated with players ahead of time, and that's on us. So
it's almost like Scott.
Yes.
Sorry, go on. Finish
no,
what you were going to say.
I've got another example for when they tried to do this with UFC 3 earlier this year, but I love just how much they're just sort of like, oh, sorry, oh, should have told you, don't, as if it's
almost
not
like this information should have been in the reviews, you know what I mean? It should have been ready for everyone else playing the game and writing up what they think about the game if it's going to be a core part of the game. You would think, man, that would be a decent way to communicate that adverts were going to be in the game. Yeah. I don't know, that's just me. I'm not a game executive. I don't know what I'm doing, It's fine.
I think if you're number crunchy EA, I can't think of a nickname for EA, so feel free to think of one down in the comments. We've just sort of been going, oh, EA, like just a general sort of disdain. But yeah, if you're them and you're trying to think of every part of a game where you can inject a little bit more monetization, another advert, another sponsorship deal, something like that, do a Square Enix with the Avengers, just sort of license some apples on the side and throw that into your game while you're on. I can see why they want to try and monetize as much of it as possible in a sports setting, because those arenas, the fighters, whatever, they lend themselves to having brands and sponsorship deals anyway. So you can kind of see some executive person going like, well, it's fine, it'll make sense, no one will care, whatever. I will read you this other thing though, because GameSpot reported back, as part of this overall thing, they reported on back in July, EA tried this with UFC 3. It was part of a deal with AT&T and Warner Media. They put adverts for Snowpiercer and Rick and Morty into the game. That was UFC 3, so that was back in July. But this is GameSpot's writer, but apparently the idea of these tests was to determine how players might react to in-game adverts in a console game as opposed to a free-to-play title for mobile, where this is common practice. So right there and then, they sort of knew the waters that they were treading into. Like, yes, this isn't a freemium game, this isn't a free mobile game, and it's going to look intrusive as hell if you start bombarding us with adverts in the middle of our 60 quid game.
Well, it's clear that they knew how people would react to this. Otherwise, they wouldn't have added them in after the reviews went up, after the review period. You know what I mean? Anytime a company does that, you can tell they're kind of like embarrassed about what they're doing, or they're a bit ashamed, and they know the backlash, but it's just, there's too much money on offer for them to not try it or to push it as far as they can. And I feel like over the past few years, we've seen publishers, EA, WB, come out at launch with these ideas that they know people aren't going to like, do them anyway to see if they can get away with it. More often than not, they can't, and then they have to backpedal. But it's just that kind of the cheekiness of it, and that makes it seem more harmless than it is. But it is quite cheeky to just be like, we know you're going to hate this, we're going to try it anyway, because what if you don't? If you don't hate it, we're going to make loads and loads of money. And like they mentioned, you know what I mean? Like ads in sports games especially, not necessarily new, but the way it's been implemented, like the way that it is kind of on the main menu, like they said, it's on the mat, it's in-game, and now it's on the replays. It's just every single inch of the game kind of feels like it's encroaching on this advertising thing, and that's made even more egregious because those kinds of adverts are, like they said, linked to free-to-play games and not premium games that you've already spent $60 on or whatever.
I mean, it is a strange thing because I feel like, and this is probably like a negative overall. This is my bad. I feel like it's more quote unquote acceptable in sports games to some degree, providing it's not too egregious and it's not too in your face. Just like I said, just because of the reality of those sports anyway, already playing into, if you want something to look more authentic, like in a football stadium or a UFC arena or whatever, you're kind of gonna need certain brands, certain adverts or whatever around the arena to make that look right. And I remember, that whole general conversation about in-game advertising, it sort of waxed and waned over the last few couple of decades, because as soon as broadband connections came in, then you had companies able to just plug adverts in a live space, and change things around in like a live sort of way. And I don't know, I go back and forward on that, the utilization of it, because you said beforehand, like, there is a way to do it just needs to be respectful of the consumer. There is a way for it to potentially add to a game's overall immersion or whatever. If you're playing as a UFC fighter in a giant, Madison Square Garden arena, it's going to look, it's kind of part of the experience for it to have a few sort of tie-in deals. But the way that EA did it, like you said, it's post-launch. It reminds me of like Metal Gear Solid 5, changing its mother-based currency and stuff like that after launch. Like, if you're doing anything that tweaks the fundamental experience after launch, especially a month after the review period has passed, that's immediately like ridiculous.
Totally, man. And like, I can totally see people who might kind of want to jump on the defensive and say, well, it's trying to reflect how it is in real life. It's trying to create that immersion. And I do kind of like agree with that in a small fraction of a sense when it comes to kind of what's in the game. So like the advertisements on the mats and like things like that. If you play FIFA, like the advertising boards around the thing. I mean, I don't necessarily want it in there, but I can see the argument for it being a more authentic version of the sport or whatever. But this kind of reminds me of like, and this is going to sound like a tangent, but I promise it's not, right? I've been watching The Sopranos recently. Right. And in that show has a lot of product placement. It has a lot of product placement for Coca-Cola. So you see like Coke cans all over the place. Now, when I watch that at home, that stuff isn't cut out because it's an intrinsic part of like the show. That's how it was filmed. But the adverts, when you're binge watching something, those are obviously cut out. And that's kind of like the distinction to me when it comes to kind of UFC 4. Like the replays and the adverts on the replays, that doesn't need to be there. That's not an intrinsic part of the experience. That's not something you don't lose something if you don't have that, I don't think, because it's just mimicking a broadcast, and you might kind of like fast forward that stuff anyway if you were watching or whatever. Whereas kind of when it comes to the adverts that are kind of imprinted, in the arenas, on the fighters' clotheswear, on the sponsors that are kind of reflective of real life stuff, that's harder to kind of get away with, to get away from, because that kind of that does make it more authentic. That does make it more immersive. It's like playing PES and you don't have like the official sponsors, or you don't have the official teams. There is genuinely kind of like something lacking there because those sponsors and those brands are so linked to the sport. But there's a way to take the piss with it, like EA has done, and thankfully backtracked on, admittedly.
Yeah, there's like an invisible line, and we all know when you've gone over it, but you're gonna have to get somewhere near to it for those sort of genres to work, or those sorts of visuals or whatever to work. Like I said, if you're realizing a Madison Square Garden, it's just gonna look weird if it didn't have any branding at all. But this falls more in line with. Do you remember the thing that happened with Street Fighter V, where Capcom just plastered logos all over the fighters, just on their chests and arms and everything? It just looked ridiculous. There's always a way to do it, but I think as soon as it gets done in this way, we immediately know that it looks terrible. And I was going to say good on them for pulling back, but no, just you did the terrible thing, and then you stopped the terrible thing. So
dude, I'll tell you what, man. I feel like all sports games this year have just kind of been hated in a way. We've had what's just come out? We had NBA 2K, we've had NFL so far, we've had UFC, we've had like a bunch of these sports games start trickling out, just in time for a new generation. We had obviously the controversy around like the pricing, I think it was the NBA game, 2K's NBA game, that had like an extra $10 to get the next gen version. And it's like, these games, especially because they're kind of so accessible and so broad and appeal to a casual market, I feel like they're often... huge audience. I feel like they're often the testing grounds for how much these publishers can get away with. Like, how much advertising can we pump into it? How little can we change year on year? How many microtransactions can we cram into, Ultimate Team or online modes or, career modes in a way? And it's like, it just seems like it's getting worse, even if you do get occasional backtracks. It's like, it's kind of just treating a symptom and not treating the fundamental underlying problem of this entire subgenre. Across publishers as well.
Yeah. Well, they've had to. I was going to say they've had to. They are trying to find a way to monetize games to result in the same bottom line as they have with loot boxes. So it's like, okay, the whole industry hates loot boxes now and random rewards. So we need to try and think of something else. So let's just throw adverts in different places and things like that. And yeah, I mean, UFC 4 overall is a solid game, but it's just like and better than UFC 3. But like throwing these things in, it just it stands out in a really obvious way. But of course, EA tried this. It's almost like they're like the scamps in the corner. Like, well, we had to try. We had to do this little thing. We had to do a slingshot the teacher at least once. It just turns out that we are all the teacher. But yeah, let us know what you think down in the comments below of the general state of in-game advertising. When do you feel like it's gone too far? What's your general thoughts on the idea of it being done well? For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
And we'll catch you next time.
Bye.